Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Laura Cohen. I'm the executive director here at the Kupferberg Holocaust Center at Queensborough Community College at the City University of New York in Bayside, Queens. Our mission is to use the lessons of the Holocaust to educate current and future generations about the ramifications of prejudice, racism, and stereotyping. Today's special event is a talk about the film From Swastika to Jim Crow, the German Jewish refugee scholars hired at HBCUs, featuring a talk with the documentarians Joel Sucher and Stephen Fischler. For those of you joining online, a link to watch the film in the next 24 hours is in your Zoom invitation email. And for those of you here in person, we'll screen the film directly after the talk in this classroom. The Kupferberg Holocaust Center in Bayside, New York is situated on the traditional land of the Mantinecock people who continue to live here today. We offer gratitude and respect to all of the indigenous people of Turtle Island, past, present, and future, including the Lenape and Shinnecock peoples. What I just read is what we call a land acknowledgement. This is a statement recognizing that the land we all occupy in the course of our daily lives, including our schools, jobs, parks, and homes, as well as the names of towns and roads, was first inhabited by another group of people who were forcibly expelled and murdered. Today, we identify those crimes for what they are: mass atrocities and genocide. These horrors continue to have devastating political, social, come on in, psychological, economic, and environmental impacts upon and within Native American and Indigenous communities. We've got some students coming in, so I'm going to encourage you all to kind of come in now if you can, please. Come on in. Yeah? Yep, the class is here. Come on in. This event is part of the 2025-26 Harriet and Kenneth Kupferberg Holocaust Center and National Endowment for the Humanities Colloquium entitled Resistance, Resilience, and Reinvention: Artists and Academics Escaping Nazism, and is co-sponsored by 8 organizations across the country, and they include the Center for the Study of Genocide and Human Rights at Rutgers University, the Reef Center for Human Rights and Conflict Resolution at Christopher Newport University, the Ray Walpole Institute for the Study of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Crimes Against Humanity at Western Washington University, the Holocaust, Genocide, and Interfaith Education Center at Manhattan University, the Institute for Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention at Binghamton University, the Human Rights Institute at Kean University, and the Queens College Center for Jewish Studies. I'd like to thank our colleagues from the Media Services and Digital Transformation departments, including Phil Roncaroni and Jesse Pina, as well as Borana Soman, the KHC's museum coordinator, for their help in producing today's event. Before we begin, come on in, the class is in here. A reminder for those of you attending in person to please turn your phones off. Hi, come on in, the class is in here. So that there's no disruptions. And after the discussion, we'll hand out a mic for those of you here so we can talk during the Q&A. For those of you attending online, please be sure to put your questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So now that's the business of the event. So now it's my pleasure to introduce one of this year's KHC NEH Faculty Fellows, Dr. Beth Cunahan. Dr. Cunahan has been a professor in QCC's English department for the past 24 years, active in teaching and coordinating high-impact practices, college and university service, and pedagogical scholarship. Her scholarship includes numerous National 2-Year College Association presentations on nature-infused curriculum and reading in the community college classroom, and was a corresponding co-author of a chapter about the QCC Common Read Initiative in the 2017 text, What is College Reading? And she's especially devoted to first semester QCC students taking part in the college's learning communities, service learning, the Common Read, as well as organizing the KHG-funded Welcome Read Initiative. Dr. Cunahan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you to Dr. Cohen and Borana Soman, and to Phil and Jesse, to my colleagues, Professor Cimino and Dr. Zelser, for working on organizing the colloquium together, and our attendees in person and online, both present and future, and to Joel Sucher and Stephen Fischler for coming today to present From Swastika to Jim Crow, the German Jewish refugee scholars hired at HBCUs. This is our first lecture of the spring semester in the series Resistance, Resilience, and Reinvention: Artists and Academics Escaping Nazism. In 1933, as Hitler consolidated power, Thousands of Jewish and dissident artists and academics faced persecution, not only from Nazi anti-Semitism, but also from the regime's totalitarian control over culture and society. As Nazism spread, many painters, writers, filmmakers, scholars sought refuge in Europe and the United States, though restrictive and anti-Semitic immigration policies often blocked their escape. This series explores the history, contributions, and lasting impact of those who escaped and those who did not. Additionally, the series highlights the resistance and creative works that emerged from their survival. Please join me now in a moment of silence in remembrance of those who did not escape the Nazi religious, intellectual, and artistic persecution, and all those impacted by the Holocaust. Okay, thank you. Now please join me in welcoming our speakers today. Producers and directors, Joel Soucher and Stephen Fischler, principals at Pacific Street Films, have been producing documentaries for over 5 decades. Joel Soucher is also a writer and blogger whose work has appeared in numerous publications. Fischler and Soucher are both recipients of numerous awards and fellowships, including Guggenheim Fellowships in Film. In 1978, they were the youngest recipients to be given the honor. Their films have covered a wide range of subjects and issues as diverse as police surveillance, the United Nations, and behind-the-scene looks at Hollywood figures, and have been distributed widely and broadcast both on public and cable television in this country and overseas. In 2004, the Museum of Modern Art held a retrospective of Pacific Street Films, followed by another retrospective in 2005 at the Harvard Film Archives, which since 2013 has been acquiring and digitizing the Pacific Street collection of visual materials and documents for both scholarly research and for the general public. So please, let's welcome Joe and Steve.
Thank you for that. That was really stirring.
Well, the film is from Swastika to Jim Crow. I guess you haven't seen the film yet. But maybe what we can do is introduce the film and start by talking about how the film actually happened.
Yeah, the thing is, this is like when you make a documentary film, or even if you're a writer, sometimes things just appear and out of nowhere and inspire something. So the film sort of began, I was on a vacation with my first wife in Florida in 1994, and I see this article in the New York Times, got a copy of, and it was somebody saying that during that time, there was a lot of kind of rhetoric. Khalid Mohammed was being accused of delivering anti-Semitic speeches, and there was a lot of that turmoil. So in this letter to the editor, this guy was saying, well, I remember a time when I was hired by a black college, and Ralph Bunche, who's a very famous Nobel Peace Prize winner, hired me. So I said to my then wife, I said, wow, interesting story. What is this about? So when I got back, I told Steve, I said, we need to check this guy out. I don't know who he is. His name was John Hers. So,
Well, he wrote a letter to the, what Joe was referring to, a letter to the editor of the New York Times, and it was around the time that Khalid Muhammad from the Nation of Islam was going to speak at Howard University. And at that time, it was very controversial, and people were arguing freedom of speech, black anti-Semitism, so on and so forth. So this letter, I'll read at least one part of it. Thus, I got my first teaching job at Howard University through Ralph Bunche, then chairman of political science at Howard. Similarly, at his recommendation, okay, I'll just jump ahead. Mutual sympathy as victims of persecution and discrimination united the mostly Jewish refugees who had barely escaped the impending Holocaust of Black Americans. The helping hand stretched out by Black colleges and Black scholars should not be forgotten at a time when, alas, Jewish-Black relations have become strained. I will forever remember gratitude. John Hers, Scarsdale, New York, and he was professor emeritus at that point of City College.
But the funny thing is, at that time, our office was in Hastings-on-Hudson, which is probably no more than 2 miles from Scarsdale. So I said, hey, let's go check this guy out.
So I called him up, and he hung up on me. He thought I was a salesman. I called again, and he just hung up the phone. I wrote him a letter. He never responded. So we wrote another letter and sent it FedEx, because everyone opens a FedEx envelope, right? It's got to be something important. And I'm sorry. So we got to actually to be quite friendly with him and with his wife. And in his letter, he mentions a book called From Swastika to Jim Crow by Gabrielle Edgecomb. I brought a copy of the book here. And it's really mostly a research paper with a lot of the transcripts of interviews that Gabrielle Edgecomb did. She was she was a German Jewish immigrant who came in 1936 to the United States, and she was very involved in the civil rights movement, and she started to notice that at all the Black colleges that she went to, that there were all of these older Jewish professors there. So she did some research into that. She was the first person to really notice that this was this was something that was going on. No one really, these scholars never self-identified as a group, but she noticed them and wrote this book.
But also you got to remember that, in the when Hitler took power in 1933, the handwriting was on the wall. So the smart people left, and you had people like Einstein. Now, Einstein was already world famous. So he could come,
Go to Princeton.
doors were open, Princeton, not a problem. But you had a whole bunch of other academics and intellectuals. And
Younger scholars, yeah.
they didn't have the cachet that Einstein did. So they had to figure out ways to get themselves out of Germany, to the United States. And there were a number of different organizations, refugee organizations, that did help them. But the problem is, where do they go when they're here? And at the time, mainstream universities were largely anti-Semitic. Harvard, Princeton, they were not very welcoming. So it was by kind of fluke that some of these refugee scholars had contacts and say, hey, you know what? You should go check out Tougaloo or Talladega. And then they got hired. It wasn't really that organized, but it was just like, wow.
Well, I think the Rockefeller Foundation was involved in some of that. And as John Hers mentioned, Ralph Bunche, who was a noted African-American scholar at that point, and later got a Nobel Peace Prize for his work in the Middle East for the United Nations. And he hired John Hers to teach at Howard University. And Hers told us about stories because, Jim Crow was really alive in those days, which was the perpetuation of the laws limiting Black freedom before the Civil War. Afterwards, those laws didn't exist, but there was an informal sense of what you could do and what you couldn't do.
Yeah, you'll see it in the film. I mean, the thing is, basically they had things called the sovereign commissions in certain states. Sovereignty commissions were established to make sure that the civil rights movement never got off the ground. They were there. They do the same thing that you see today, write down people's license plate numbers, go to their employers and saying, your employee is attending these civil rights rallies. You need to deal with it, meaning you got to get rid of them. And
It's not in the film, but Hearst told us that Bunch, this was in Washington, D.C. in the 1940s, he needed dress clothes because he was a professor and a scholar and whatever. He couldn't go into the stores in Washington, D.C. to buy them. He'd have to go shopping with the Hearses, and they could go in and buy the clothes that he needed because they were white. So, this is just really an example of how those things affected everyday activities. So we, after reading this and thinking and meeting hers, we thought that, there's a story here. This could be an interesting film. So we contacted Gabrielle Edgecomb.
The thing about Gabrielle, she was really a wonderful woman, and she doesn't really get enough credit. Unfortunately, she died. She never saw the film, and I would go talk to her almost every day because we had to raise money to make this film. She'd go, oh, yes, what's going on? I go, Gabrielle, hang in there, hang in. Oh, yeah. Tell me another, blah, blah, blah. We eventually were able to secure money from the PBS, ITVS, the part of PBS at that time gave money to independent filmmakers. That's pretty much gone now. But this was the early 90s, and we got a little bit of money out of them, and then we took that money, we started to take a drive down south where we were able
Well, that was the first we got a grant for $5,000, and we were shooting another story in D.C. And we went to Durham, and we wanted to see who we could find. And we were looking for Ernst Manasse, who's the first scholar you'll meet in the film. And we didn't find him. So we said, before we leave town, let's just drive past all the old age homes in town. Maybe we can find him. And sure enough, we did.
We found him, and he was great. And
we did
he's really a
one of the
piece
first
work.
interviews we did. So he was in a.
But the lucky thing is that I remember we've got enough money to actually do the trip. Gabrielle couldn't believe it. She was so totally taken over the moon. But again, it was a tragic that she had breast cancer. She didn't live to see the film premiere. But we dedicate the film to
But
her.
after she died, her friends, and she had a lot of friends in the D.C. area, did a fundraising and raised a significant amount of money for the film, which was great. It was great.
Questions? Should we?
Do you want to go into questions?
Sure. I mean,
Well-
we can ramble on and on, but I mean, people have.
Well, just one of the things, before you do that, I think we should talk about one of the things that I still really enjoy about the film is the relationship between the scholars and their students. And that's really at the heart of the story. And I think that's pretty wonderful. When you see it, when you see the film, I think you'll know what I mean. And they were meaningful and really important.
And I think the film is, evergreen in the sense that this film was 1999 we finished it.
2000, I think.
2000, it was first broadcast on PBS. But given the state of the world and given the state of conflict, it remains, I think, relevant to race relations, activism, the fact that, no matter how bad things are, as long as you're out there and raise your voice, then that's ultimately, I think, will
I mean,
win out.
some of these scholars were involved in civil rights activities.
Well, Gabrielle, definitely. Her and her
Gabrielle.
husband, she was
Right, but
really
I meant
heavily
the
involved.
scholars in the film. Well, she's in the film too, but they were. And one of the last scholar in the film, Ernst Berinsky, there's a shot from a document from the state of Mississippi about him, a file, and it's labeled race agitator.
Yes. But just, I think alongside of this discussion, when I came in, I saw this thing about Namibia. Now, it struck me because we were in Namibia in 1989, with the UN. We were doing a big film about UN peacekeeping around the world. And basically, it was unbelievable because people don't realize that Namibia, which was called Southwest Africa, was where a lot of Nazis escaped to after the war. So when we were there, we were told by UN people, we knew very well, said, listen, you got to be careful. If you go to Swakopmund, they raised the flag on Hitler's birthday. And we saw these characters walking on the streets with monocles, for real, right? And
later Hoshi.
Yeah, later Hoshi, but I had later Hoshi. But the thing is, they were dangerous people. And to this day, there are people living in Namibia, Germans, who will, there's a famous song called the Südwesterlied. It's a song about how wonderful the Germans were when they owned and ran Southwest Africa before it became Namibia. So there's a lesson to be learned there in terms of genocide. And probably this is where one of the first genocides was carried out by the Germans. And they'll deny, and even that memory of that genocide is, I think, fading away within Germany itself. Which is why it's great to have that.
Yeah, against the Namib people.
Well, I want to thank you for kind of doing this little introduction for us, and then to open it up to some questions. So you guys had read the letter in the Times by John Hers in 1994. So the film came out in 1999.
Yeah.
So that's 5 years of working on the film. So if you could talk a bit about your process doing the researching, the interviewing, because you guys will see in the film some of the professors are interviewed, as well as some historians and the students as well. There are students that they mentored who then all became professors themselves or artists. So, and then also there's archival footage and there's great music. So in how you researched it and put it together, if you could talk a bit about that process, especially with the interviews and finding everybody, if you could talk about that.
Well, the thing is about film, everything has to come together. You got to have the right team. I think that, if you have the right team, like for instance, we had a great editor. His name was Martin Tao. The guy was really, editing is a lot like music. There's a rhythm that you have to kind of have when you make cuts, stuff like that. And we come from the old days where everything was done with 16 millimeter, which I loved. Because it was tactile and you feel it. And, I was a cameraman for many years and Steve was a sound man. So in terms of putting the film together, you have a team, and then you talk and you talk and you talk. And then somebody says, let's try it this way. And somebody else says, no, that way. And then you clash. It's kind of a friendly, battle. And, you work out some kind of compromise.
Yeah, we did a lot of work in those intervening years of finding the interviewees, the scholars and the students, and figuring out which ones we thought would be good in the film. But the reason it took a lot of years, two things. Principally raising the money to make the film, because raising the money from documentaries is not easy. And also editing. We had a bunch of different outlines and structures, and until we finally came upon the structure that you see in the film here, which is the stories of 5 different scholars. There's some other intervening history and stuff that we tell, but basically we decided to do it with the characters and try to make each of these scholars kind of people that you would know. So there would be some kind of human connection with the audience, and that's...
But hands down, I'd say, you got to have a good editor. If you don't have a good editor, you're screwed. For instance, our background, we were NYU Film School students of Scorsese, then we went on to make some films about him. His editor,
Thelma.
was 86, I think. He's used her for almost every film. Why? Because she had an internal kind of mechanism where she knew what he wanted, they were in sync. So you don't have to, we've gone through films where we had like 2 or 3 editors come through, they were useless. That for me is the most important element in making a film, a good editor.
Right, because there's 2 kinds of editing. There's an editor can be a technician, and you sit there and say, okay, we're going to L-cut this, make that first shot a little shorter and bring in the audio, or a creative editor who says, give me 2 days. I have an idea for the open. Let me work on it. And I think what Joe was saying is that Marty was a creative editor and contributed a lot to the...
He's working for like Martha Stewart now, I think.
Something like that. I don't know.
Anyway, the thing is, in terms of interviewing, our technique was always, when you interview somebody, at least the kind of process we develop, you obviously you make eye contact, but you want to let people talk. You don't want to talk over them. Interviews, you see these interviewers now, they're so quick to kind of make their point by making their point instead of eliciting what they want from the interviewee.
Right. The worst thing is just reading your list of questions. You really want to make it more of a conversation. So if the interviewee mentions something or other that leads you to question 14 and you've only asked 2 questions, you go there. You want to keep that kind of conversational flow.
And you want to listen to what they're saying, so you can. If you may have a list of questions, but that may change depending on what the person says. So you just go with the flow and you ask them, what you think is appropriate at the moment. The other thing we do is we always tell somebody we're not going to use our question. So incorporate our question in your response. So let's say I ask them, are you feeling okay today? They're going to say, yes, we can't really use it. So you're going to have to incorporate, well, I'm feeling okay today because. That sort of gets lost in a lot of, interviewing I've seen. So you want to kind of elicit, you want to be friendly. You want this not to be, I'm a great interviewer and you're just going to respond to my questions. You really need to have one-on-one as equals. And I think that's kind of worked for us in our films. And
yeah, we've done a lot of interviews over the years because we've made a whole mess of films.
Sometimes you fall asleep when somebody's going on and on. You don't want to embarrass them, say, shut up.
This film we did we did a couple of films about the United Nations, and there was one guy who was like some general. He was in the Congo, and
he was a Pakistani general. That was a
we were trying to get to have him talk about Patrice Lumumba, and he would not
shut up.
Jump cut. He was going to tell the story from the very beginning, and
then the Finnish guy.
I think the only interview I kind of nodded out a little bit during the interview. It just went on for hours.
But then also, I remember the UN thing, we were in Finland interviewing a big general. The Finns are great. My wife is of Finnish extraction. The guy was sitting there with his fly open. Remember that? Like, okay.
Well, also when we were in Namibia covering the transition to independence, we were interviewing this Nigerian general, and who was very dark-skinned, and sometimes because it's hot there, you want to put a little powder on or something so the interview's not really sweaty. And I think Josanne came in dead and left a giant circle on his forehead, and luckily the guy thought it was really funny. But for a moment we said, oh shit, we're in trouble.
Can I ask you too, because when you see the film, you see that the film is not told necessarily chronologically. It's more crafted towards telling the stories of these professors and their students. And one of the most major figures, Professor Berinsky, comes at the very end of the film. And then that really leaves you, Joyce Ladner talking about how he really influenced her and mentored her. And it ends the film on such an emotional note that I'm wondering, as you're interviewing people, as you're kind of trying to do all the research, sometimes do you see the thing that you want to save for the end? Did you know at the time, interviewing and thinking that we would save his story for the end?
I guess I don't think during the shooting, but during the editing, we felt that was a stronger story, so we wanted to close with it.
Right.
But yes.
Yeah, sometimes an interview is so compelling, like Joyce. And Joyce Ladner, bless her heart, is still out there. We're still very good friends with her. Her sister passed away a couple.
Oh.
The Ladner sisters were a legend in the civil rights movement. And I mean, they really had great stories to tell. Even, Joyce knew Bob Dylan, and she provided like overnight accommodations when he was starting out. So she's got great stories about him. But the thing is, yeah, sometimes the interview is so strong,
One other thing I want to mention, after the film was broadcast and it was a few years old, we spun off a museum exhibit with the Museum of Jewish Heritage based on the film called Beyond Swastika in Jim Crow. And that was really really interesting to do a museum exhibit, because it's based upon things that are not in film, which are artifacts. In films, you're dealing with images, footage, stills, and so on. In a museum exhibit, you want artifacts. But that was a really, I feel, successful enterprise. It traveled around the country and, lots of different venues. So that was kind of an interesting thing to do.
The other thing is gratifying that its history is getting preserved, because as we all know, history is quickly getting written out. So, basically, as the Brits used to say in World War II, keep calm and carry on. But I think keeping that in mind, that this history will not go away, despite efforts to kind of make it vaporize. So, again, it's a tough time, but I think what this film does and demonstrates is that we can kind of keep those memories alive and, inspire others.
Anyone in the audience? Do you have any questions in mind that you'd like to ask? Yeah.
Why were there black colleges back in the days?
There were well, that's also an interesting world that we discovered in making the film. After the Civil War, there were no institutions of higher education for African Americans. So the Methodist Church started some black colleges, and some were land-grant colleges started by different states. Today, there are about 115 to 120 black colleges.
Known as HBCUs, which are historically black colleges.
College and universities. And certainly in the 19th and the early part of the 20th century, they were the primary places where African Americans got a college education. And so their history is really important, and they still exist, and there are white students at HBCUs now as well. It's not that you can't be a student there if you're not
The whole
black.
question of HBCUs and why they exist is a question that's ongoing. However, was it Bezos' first wife? What's her name? Mackenzie
Mackenzie
Scott
Scott.
gave an enormous, bless her heart, an enormous amount of money to the United Negro College Fund to kind of basically discuss why they're important, why they should exist, and their historical significance.
Actually, the United Negro College Fund contacted us about this film, so we're going to be doing. Haven't kind of worked it out yet, but there is going to be some kind of partnership that we're going to do with the United Negro College Fund. But the HBCUs, all of them except for 3 are below the Mason-Dixon line, which was the dividing line between northern and southern states during the Civil War. There were 3, a couple in Pennsylvania, Lincoln University or Liberty College, and
Howard in D.C.
Howard in D.C. Yeah.
Another question. Do we still have black colleges here some more, or not anymore?
No, they're around. Yep.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we showed the film at a number of HBCUs, and it's really interesting places and people, actually. I mean, you'll see, you mentioned Berinsky, who's the last story in the film. He became such an integral part of the campus at Tougaloo College, which is in Jackson, Mississippi, that he's buried on campus.
Yeah.
And it's pretty meaningful to visit his grave, I have to say.
One more question.
Shoot.
When do we start it with black colleges?
We started them around the time of the Civil War.
Right after.
Right after the Civil War. They were part of Reconstruction, right? Because Reconstruction theoretically was a time when they're going to put into effect the principles of the 13th Amendment and so on that were decided by the Union victory in the Civil War. Of course, not all of that worked out as well. And John Hope Franklin, who's in the film, he was the preeminent American scholar of Reconstruction, of the Reconstruction era. He wrote the foreword to this book. He was close. He was very friendly with Gabrielle.
And we were lucky to interview him down in Durham, Duke
University.
Very interesting.
Do you guys in the audience, anyone else have a question? Because I'm going to ask. And then, Laura, we have any online? Okay. If you don't mind, I'll ask this one, which is the narrator of the film is a well-known historian, Luc Sante, who's now Lucy Sante, and wrote a very well-known book called Low Life about New York City history, particularly New York City history like prior to the Civil War. That was became a lot of people were very, very interested in it. And if you've ever seen the film Gangs of New York, the Scorsese film, kind of connected to it a little bit, not necessarily inspired by it, but they came out kind of this similar time. And
it's a wonderful book. It's really a lot of fun.
It's a fantastic book. So how did you get Lucy Sante to narrate?
He wasn't Lucy yet, but we were thinking about who the narrator might be, and we thought because he or she's was born in Belgium and is here as an immigrant and has a kind of accent to his voice that we thought was interesting. Yeah. So we just called him up, showed him the film, and he said, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And came up to the office one day and we recorded the narration.
I just should mention that generally, as a rule, we like to do films that are not narrated. Basically, we like to do films where the people your interview, tell the story, and then you do whatever else.
And sometimes,
But this seemed to really need a narrator, so that's pretty much how we went out looking. And we were in Hastings at the time, and I think that we set up the bathroom. We used the bathroom as a
yeah, we built
recording
like a little ersatz recording thing. We were going to do a scratch narration. And we recorded it in there, but, you know, it sounded great. So we said, we just use this as the narration for the
Yeah, that's
film.
another trick if you're making a film. If you're making a film, you always tell the camera people and the sound people, start rolling before I tell you to roll. Just as soon as I sit down, roll. And then when you're having a discussion, sometimes people will say the greatest stuff. And then they'll go, okay, are you ready to interview me? And you ask the same question, it's totally stilted. So that's kind of, we use that technique quite a bit.
So we have one question in the chat online, but before I go into the question, I wanted to mention, for those of you in the classroom and for those of you online who can't see this, the KHC just launched a new exhibition in the classroom called Genocide and Mass Atrocities, Connecting History, Violence, and Accountability. Right now, there are 6 case studies up that include Namibia, Nanjing in East China, Rwanda, Cambodia, Sudan, and Myanmar. And in the next month or so, we'll be launching another 7 case studies, including the transatlantic slave trade in Black America, Turtle Island, Bosnia and Herzegovina, the case of the Uyghurs in Northwest China, Argentina, and also Guatemala. And many professors here at Queensborough and staff have been participating in a workshop that is jointly led by the KHC and Queensborough's Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Center. It's called Unseen Threads, where we do a lot of work here at the center on the memory of atrocities and the Holocaust. And then we go to Montgomery, Alabama to visit the Equal Justice Initiative sites, which is a group of museums, sculpture park, and memorial that focus on the legacy of the transatlantic and domestic slave trade and its connection to mass incarceration today. So we're always thinking about these linkages. And then online, I wanted to ask you both, several people who've written in have seen the film, which is wonderful, and that it's highly relevant today. So you've been talking a lot about the historical scholars that were involved and at the colleges. Do you see scholars today that are kind of engaging in these partnerships, either who are Black or who are Jewish or who are Black and Jewish?
Yeah, I think so. Someone was in Lomax or someone.
John Eves is Black and
Eves.
Jewish.
He was saying, you know, there's like a next generation of Jewish and European scholars at Black colleges. So yeah, that kind of tradition has continued, and I think that's pretty interesting. I mean, there was always some white involvement in the Black college movement, even in the 18th century. The 19th century, excuse me. And then in the 20th century, in like the 20s, 30s, which was a politically different time, a lot of communists, people moved by the communist movement, enrolled as students in Black colleges, the white students. So, you know, that different times, there have been different political motivations for people to want to be students at HBCUs.
Yeah, but also I think that it's sort of, as far as that's concerned, there's also the other bits of history that tend to get forgotten, like even Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman, the 3 civil rights workers, 1 African-American, 2 white, who got murdered by the Klan.
And 1 Jewish.
And and were students at Queens College.
Were they?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So then you have another little known story of Viola Liuzzo, who was Italian, who suddenly, you know, it was like an amazing story. She goes, I want to join this movement. She was murdered. She was Italian American. So you have these stories that kind of do connect, you know, in a meaningful way about this kind of resistance.
And as what were the effects or the legacy of hiring of these academics in the college towns? Have synagogues or family names remained there?
I think the significance, well, there are 2 areas. One, the significance for the colleges. The HBCUs they were really very underfunded. Like the annual salary that some of these scholars in the film were offered was $1,800 a year. But they brought an academic excellence that these colleges and universities didn't have. These were people who had been students at Heidelberg University and other well-known places in Europe, and they were, you know, they had their shit together, so to speak. And so in that sense, they did help elevate the academic excellence of these schools. In terms of what their relationships with the general public, well, that was problematic because they were white, but resented by the white people in the towns because they were Jewish, they were European, they were foreigners, they worked at a black college.
And they spoke with accents.
So for those things, it was like, they got no respect. And I'm not going to give away everything, but Manasse in the film says he taught at North Carolina College for Negroes, which is now North Carolina University. What happens in Europe is you have an interesting conversation in class. He invited students to his house to continue the talk. Then he gets a letter from his neighbor saying, if you do that again, we're going to shoot them. So like he had no idea that this was going to happen. That just inviting to his house was going to be, someone could get murdered for that. So, you know, there was a lot of tension in that regard. And I think it was hardest, not so much for the scholars, because many of them were committed to civil rights and were willing to make the personal sacrifices necessary, but their children had a hard time. It was very difficult for the children of these refugee scholars.
Another question, and I think it's part of this film, but it's also the larger backdrop of the historical relationship between the Black and Jewish communities. And I just wanted to invite all of you to check out some additional resources. There's a fantastic book by the scholar Mark Dollinger. It's called Black Power, Jewish Politics, who really talks about the complexity of the communities in the North and in the South. And then also, for those of you, there's the civil rights activist Eric Ward. He wrote a very powerful article in 2017 called Skin in the Game that talks about how anti-Semitism also underpins racism, and it's a really important work. And he does a lot of conversations with the lawyer Amy Spitalnik, and they do a lot of conversations around what it means to have an inclusive democracy. And finally, there's another organization that's out called the Jews of Color Initiative, which I encourage you to check out. Beth?
I want to take it way back in time to wonder how you guys met each other and how you started working together, because I think we hear how you're in sync so much together that you're, finishing each other's sentences, picking up the thought. So if you could tell us how you got to know each other, how you started working together.
It's not always been that fluid, but yes.
Look, it's really our background. Well, first of all, I was born in a DP camp in Germany after the war. And my father was smart enough and did black market stuff, so we were able to get out. Interestingly, his father, we're both Jewish, his father was a B-25?
B-24.
B-24 pilot, a radio gunner who got shot down and ended up in a Stalag Luft 3.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in that way, kind of interesting connection, maybe of a metaphysical sort. But we met when I moved from, I was living in near Bed-Stuy.
Flatbush.
Sort of Flatbush. But
East New York.
No, not Bushwick. East New York, thanks. I was living in East New York. And, my father at that time, because he was an immigrant and he encountered a lot of anti-Semitism, and he was the kind of guy who never backed down from a fight. The one thing about my father, he never backed down from a fight. And he was hauling around junk auto parts, because you could pick up junk auto parts, resell them, because at that time, you could rebuild old auto parts. So he wandered into a Chevy showroom or something, and there was a there's a bunch of people. There was a cop there. And the cop says, my father didn't speak good English. The cop says to my father, says, you know, shame they didn't kill you all. My father kicked this guy's ass so badly. I have my father's mugshot. He's missing a tooth. But what happened is this cop was Jewish himself. But he just didn't like the idea that these greeners is still coming in and, you know, taking their jobs. So what they had to do is they had to call the a rabbi that the precinct used to come in to kind of, you know, smooth things out. There wouldn't be any trouble. And again, to this day, I have my father's mugshot.
But we met in,
Nostrand
we lived
Avenue.
in adjoining apartment buildings in Nostrand Avenue in Brooklyn when we were like 9 or 10 years old. So we've known each other a long time. I won't say exactly how long.
4th grade, we met.
Yeah.
And then the thing is, we ended up, I went to Marine Park Junior, we both went to Marine Park Junior High School. Then we both got into Brooklyn Tech. At the time, Brooklyn Tech, 6,000 boys. It was not co-ed yet. Brooklyn Tech was a kind of breeding ground for anti-authoritarianism. We hated it. They used to have like this service squad, they called it. You know, it was a kind of little police. They would be asking you for your, you know, ID. You couldn't go to the bathroom without a pet. So we totally, you know, rebelled, and we had that kind of in common. In fact, I got kicked out of Brooklyn Tech for my junior year. But we always had this kind of.
But that did inspire an interest in anarchism.
Yeah.
And we've made a couple of long-form documentaries about the anarchist movement.
And then we started to work together at NYU. We both started Washington Square College.
Different majors.
Different majors, but transferred to the film school in our 3rd year. And we started to, you know, we were in Scorsese's class, so we had to start doing these student films, and we made a couple of those. And, you know, then we decided this is really cool. Let's, you know, start what we called Pacific Street Films, which was on Pacific Street in Brooklyn. And, well, we enjoyed making them. It was a lot of fun, you know, even though, you know, some of it was scary because we had to deal with surveillance. We made this film called Red Squad, which was when we went out with cameras to film the cops who were filming the demonstrations at the time. So we became the subject of surveillance.
But then we turned our cameras on then, so we filmed the cops who were surveilling us, and I think to some good effect. We made it was a good, I think, a good film, one of our best films. But until we got some press about what was happening, they were pretty heavy duty and follow us everywhere, be parked in front of the loft that we had, and
we did the same thing in Chicago with the Chicago Red Squad. They were mean.
Yeah.
They were much worse than in New York. They basically threatened, you know, they just killed Fred Hampton. I don't know if you look up the murder of Fred Hampton. He was murdered by Chicago police. There was no
he was a Black Panther.
question about it. And we got involved, and basically we were told that if we did not get out of Chicago, we'd be dead. So you weren't there. You were in a different shoot that time. So me and our friend booked the first flight out. But yeah, it was dangerous back then, you know. Probably equivalent to today. It's still pretty dangerous, given that this stuff is, you know, out there.
Maybe more so now because the intelligence gathering is so much more sophisticated.
I see a student in the back wanted to ask a question. Thank you.
Hi.
And thanks, you guys.
My name is Benjamin Wade. Thank you guys for being here. I just wanted to ask, how do you, when you're covering like a student movement or like just a movement in general, how do you make sure you're actually engaging with like majority of the student population rather than people who are like just student leaders? Because when you're like talking about something like HBCU, right, you need to have the resources to get to a HBCU. So how do you make sure it's how do you make sure it's encompassing like everything that's happening domestically and you're capturing like the full story? And another example that you brought up is like Brooklyn Tech, right? One thing that I know CUNY likes to talk about is how like CUNY used to be free for students. So after CUNY started charging students tuition, how are you looking at like the movement to try to make it free again, and not confuse that with a communist ideology or like anti-capitalist ideology? How do you not label it?
Good question.
Thank you.
You want me to
Well,
take it?
I think one part of that question, there's always been an effort on the part of particularly right-wing politicians to say any benefit awarded to people is communist or left-wing, when that's total bullshit. So, I mean, what is the purpose of the government if not to affect some positive change for the people who it consists of? So I certainly think that's the case. And in terms of how do you make sure you're filming someone, that you're getting the right story and not just filming some blowhard who loves to stand in front of a microphone and talk. I mean, I don't think there's any rules, but you have to always be, have a sensibility and some kind of selectivity about what you film and what you do. It's really it's a more informal sense that you have when you make these films.
The other thing is, I think you got to be careful when you talk about capitalism, because that's the big bugaboo. Oh, if you're not a capitalist, then you're a communist. There are many kinds of capitalism. There's predatory capitalism. There's surveillance capitalism. What it ultimately boils down to, in my opinion, is people just wanting to make a buck. That's all. Look at debt now. Credit cards through the roof. We worked on a film with the late Danny Schechter years ago called, I think you can get it online, In Debt We Trust. This, I think, was 2004. If you can get it online, I'd watch it. The whole economic underpinnings of this country, and even global capitalism, is debt. It's all debt. How much you owe, how much you're going to be forced to pay, and who holds the debt. Japan, believe it or not, holds a good bit of the debt of the global economy. So you got to be careful about how you look. You got to be very critical when you look at capitalism and people who support it, my opinion.
I have a question too. I was looking at that TV over there in Namibia during in 1904 and 1908. What was that little railroad about that I just saw?
Oh, that was the Germans. The Germans really colonized Namibia. They first colonized it, and then they decided to eliminate the indigenous people. I think it was the Herero. They murdered millions of people. And again, this was at that called Southwest
Southwest Africa.
German Southwest Africa. And it was run by the Germans. Later, as I mentioned, became the destination, the paramount destination, which people don't really know about, for Nazis. And I think
it wasn't German Southwest Africa after the Germans lost the Second World War. Then it became Namibia. But it didn't become independent till 89 or 90. And we were doing we did a film about Blue Helmets, about the UN peacekeepers. So we were there covering the transition to independence.
Which was great. I mean, it really was, it became the emerging nation that just became independent. Basically screw South Africa, because South Africa was still an apartheid nation. I remember we transited through Johannesburg.
Yeah.
Man, it's like Afrikaners, not very nice people. The ones that Trump brought in, I think, a couple months ago. These are not very nice people.
We have one more question online, taking us back a little bit, which is, did you interview refugee scholars who, because they were so disappointed in American racism, decided to return to Europe? And if so, could you discuss that?
Good question. I don't know.
We didn't interview any. We understand there were a couple who did, but they must have returned to Europe in the late 40s, early 50s, and we weren't making the film then. We were, toddlers.
Toddlers.
So we didn't. But most of them stayed, and probably about half of them never left the black colleges that they got jobs in. They found it really fulfilling, even though many of them had the opportunities to teach in more, high-tone universities.
Yeah, so I really want to thank both of you for coming and for sharing not only about from Swastika to Jim Crow, but really all of your whole fantastic careers together, all the interesting work that you've done.
You go to PacificStreetFilms.com and you can see, we've been involved in a lot of different things.
A lot, yes.
Including the history of martial arts. That's been another thing for us.
Yeah, so thank you very much for coming to Queensboro, for coming to the KHC. Thank you to everyone attending online and everyone attending in person. The film will show directly after now, and it's very moving and wonderful. I think you both really capture that whole human element, and again, for our students, for faculty, very inspiring to see how these refugee scholars mentored their students who are now mentoring other students. You really see the whole tradition of the academic world, not as a place of trying to outdo one another who's smartest or whatever, but as a place of real support and caring for students and encouraging each student to bring out the best in themselves. And that's really what these professors did. That's the beauty of it, and the beauty that you guys were able to bring and commit to film, that we can see this film now 25 years later. So thank you so much.
Well, enjoy it.
We want to thank everybody who also joined us today in person and online. We put several resources about this topic, including an event that Beth moderated last term with Dr. Laura Leff, who speaks about specifically the Jewish refugee scholars and how they were selected by HBCUs. And the film will be following right after this. For those of you joining online, if you have any issues with the film over the next 24 hours, please email us at khc@qcc.cuny.edu. And we hope you all stay safe and be well. Thanks.